Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to a new year.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year.
And a new season of Recover You.
So how many, here's the question. This used to always, but we don't write checks the way we used to, but it was probably into February when I was finally able to put the right year on a check.
Oh, yeah.
So, but yeah, that's always hard.
2025.
Yeah.
Yes, and we're in season 3 of Recover You.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome to the brand new season. We're glad you're here.
Hard-hitting topics.
We are today, at the beginning of a year is always a good time. We sort of wrapped up 2024 with an episode about reflecting on the year and thinking about the new year. And we mentioned that coming 2025, we would talk a little bit more about aligning your values and your vision. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about this concept of choosing who you want to be so you don't have to stay stuck. And part of that is aligning with your values and creating a vision. And the reason this is so important is because we live into our values and our values and our belief systems are held on the subconscious level. So when you are living life, a lot of times people think, oh, I'm a conscious being and I make decisions logically and I think through things and that's how I live my life. And while that's sort of kind of true, we actually live about 95% of our lives out of our subconscious. And that's why you end up having patterns that you don't like, behaviors that you're not proud of, because ultimately we will always live into our subconscious beliefs, even if it disagrees with our conscious. So for example, we can logically know that something is not true, but if we believe it deeply enough in our subconscious, we're going to live into that belief. So if we know that logically, like let's say you align with Christian values and logically you know that you are worthy just because you are a human and that God has placed a value on your life just because you exist. But there's a subconscious belief because of experiences that you've had in your life where you really don't believe that you're worthy and maybe you assign your value to doing things or accomplishing things or people pleasing or something like that. We all have different ways that this shows up, right? So if that is really a belief in the subconscious level, you're going to live into that belief every single time, even if you know on a conscious logical level something that contradicts that. So when we understand what our value systems are and we identify the patterns that we want to change and we create a vision for where we want to go, it just helps us to move forward. And what I think we see a lot, and this is just humanity, this isn't necessarily just like in the recovery community, right? This is just humanity, is that sometimes we just get stuck like living in our day-to-day life and we just sort of go about it. And sometimes we will assign identity to things that shouldn't be our identity. So like, oh, I'm just someone who loses my temper, or I'm just someone who is addicted to coffee, right? Like we will just sort of like give up when we've struggled with something for a period of time and just say, oh, well, maybe that's just who I am. And part of what we want to share today is that doesn't have to be who you are. We can always choose who we want to be. And when we learn how to identify those things, when we learn how to set a vision, when we learn how to identify our values, when we learn how to identify the things that are getting in our way, those limiting beliefs, then we can change all of that and we can step into the person that we want to be. And so that doesn't, of course, mean that any of us will be perfect, but having the vision helps us to not be stuck. When we don't have a clear vision, it's like if you're hiking and you have no idea what the map is or what the trail is, you're just going to wander around, right? Mm-hmm. And you might end up going in circles and you might hit the same guidepost several times. But if you have a map and you have guideposts that sort of indicate, hey, you've made it half a mile. Hey, you've made it 1 mile. Hey, you've made it 1.5 miles. then you can really identify you're moving towards that goal of completing that hike, right? That 3-mile hike. And so that's what we want to encourage you to do with your life, like just in general, like broad scope, but then with recovery and with your relationship and things like that as well, because we've shared this that like sometimes what can happen in recovery is you have kind of obvious markers, right? Like, okay, the addict needs to get sober, right? Okay, that's a big one. Or we need to go through the full therapeutic disclosure. That's a big one. Or we need to hit, this marker of not getting triggered as much, right? Like there's some very, very obvious pillars as you navigate recovery, and they just sort of like present themselves. You don't necessarily have to think too hard about them. It's just part of the recovery process. But once you've hit those, sometimes it can just feel like, oh, we're lost. Like, what do we do now? So that's kind of what we want to talk about is creating this vision so you can keep going.
Through this process, and we've talked about it a lot, and it is a big part of recovery, and actually just moving through life in a more healthy way is identifying your wounds, processing those wounds. And you talked about, most of our life, or most of our reaction is subconscious in a lot of ways, and your subconscious reaction is formed by your wounds, and whether they be large wounds, small wounds, whatever that may be. And so the nice thing with as we talk about vision and as we talk about moving forward, it doesn't mean that it's going to eliminate the subconscious, but it might actually make you more aware. And so if you go, if you've set a vision that you're moving forward and emotionally you feel yourself getting off track, that could be a big indicator of a wound that you still have to work through and process and identify but the vision helps you move in that direction. If you have no vision, if your feet are designed that you walk around in circles, to use your walking through the hiking on a trail analogy, if for whatever you walk around in circles or whatever, if you don't have a path, you just walk around in circles, right? And let's say that's what a subconscious wound is doing to you. But if you have a destination to get to, then you go, wait, why am I walking around in circles?
Yeah.
And then it helps you move in that direction. So there's always a big part of wounds are gonna impact you, and having a clear articulated vision helps you move in that direction, but also helps you, part of recovery and part of just being a more engaged human being is becoming more self-aware of what's going on in your head when you experience different, it's like we've always said, it's like we've always said that, like, just because you go into recovery as an addict doesn't mean hard things aren't going to come up in your life. They certainly are, because that's just part of living. And so how do you respond to that? How do you get there? And the vision helps you continue to move forward through the hard.
Yeah, let me give you a concrete example, because we're kind of talking like really high level about the concept. So I'll just give an example to like make it really applicable. So if when I'm talking about you living into subconscious and then also taking on identities that don't necessarily have to be your identity. An example would be that this past year, I was really working on understanding and detailing what ADD meant for me and how it was showing up in my life. And one of the ways that it shows up is a lot of overwhelm and disorganization, right? And so it could have been fairly easy for me to go, well, ADD is my identity, overwhelm is my identity, disorganization is just who I am. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm just going to keep living my life into this belief that I'm a disorganized person, and into this like maybe limiting belief that I can't really, there's nothing I can do to change, right? But instead, I was like, well, no, I want to understand ADD for sure and how it impacts my life, but I also want to get better. I want to improve. And so having that as a goal, then I actually hired a coach, and I've gotten more organizational systems in place. And it's in the past couple months, it's like really, really helped me to cook more dinners, I haven't really gotten totally in alignment with like the cleaning schedule yet, but it was also the holidays. So there was like, they would be like, we'd have to clean the whole house and the cleaners would come and then people would come and then it'd get messed up and then we had to clean them. So it's not like a regular thing yet. But generally speaking, the process of having the vision of like what I wanted to get better and then like getting somebody to help me with that means that I don't just have to sit here and be like, oh, well, I'm ADD and there's nothing I do about it. We've had so many more meals. I've more planning, more structure around grocery shopping and meal planning and getting the food on the table and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of a big deal.
And it's also allowed you to communicate. And, communication's hard because I was thinking about that conversation we had where you were like, hey, I'd like to keep this area a little bit more clean. And remember, I was like, well, wait a minute. So we were it was just, you were articulating where you wanted to be. And as sometimes happens in relationships, they can go a little, communication can get a little fraught at times. So we had to work through something because I'm aligned with your vision on that. I'm 100% aligned. And so, but it's good because you would have never had that conversation more than likely if you would have never put that request out there had it not been part of where you wanted to go. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's a good example of, sometimes you're going to come across obstacles or you're going to come across things that like, oh, oops, well, that wasn't exactly what I meant, but yes. Yeah. And then you continue to tweak it.
So today we're going to break this down into 5 different suggestions for you. And you don't have to do all 5. This isn't like do every single one of these and then you'll have your perfect vision. These are just different ways to maybe encourage you to get this process started. And maybe one really speaks to you more than another, and that's totally okay. But these are all sort of helping you align with your vision for the year, with your values to kind of help you keep going. So number 1 is this concept of choosing a word. So you've probably heard a lot of people talk about this, right? What we're not talking about today is resolutions. Like I'm going to lose 10 pounds by March 3rd, or I'm going to be sober by January 10th. That's not what we're talking about. Not that those aren't great goals, but we want to kind of go deeper than that, because the reason people set goals and then fail over and over and over is because they're not doing the deeper work of identifying the emotional patterns and thinking about the subconscious stuff. So we're talking more on an identity level, like who are you and who do you want to be? And what is the vision of like who that person that you want to be needs to step into this year in order to accomplish that? And that's the level that when you think about it on that level, you have way more success with what you might term like the surface level goals or behaviors. So the first one is choosing a word. So you've probably heard a lot of people throw this around, and maybe you love it, maybe you hate it, totally okay. You don't have to do this. For me, it's not necessarily been like a conscious thing. It's just sort of dropped in for me. Last year, it just sort of like hit me. Authenticity was my word. I didn't like sit around for half an hour thinking, what do I want my word to be for 2024, right? It just, for whatever reason, I was like, authenticity is the thing I need to focus on. And I wrote it down on my board in my office. I need to erase it because it's 2025. I need to switch it up here. But I feel like there was a lot of energetic shifting for me in 2024 around this concept. I wanted to show up as myself. I wanted to show up very authentically in my relationships, in life, in my coaching practice. And, sometimes that means that if there's a specific way that maybe somebody else is telling you to do something and it doesn't align with you, showing up authentically means it's okay, like do it the way that you need to do it right, or to do it well, or to be in alignment with your value system. And so that sometimes causes a little bit of friction internally as you're processing things. And I did go through some growth periods for sure in 2024. But it's really interesting because looking back, now that we've switched gears and kind of reflecting on that, me setting that as sort of my internal identity goal was very successful. I showed up, I think I really embraced that. And so I love that. And then again, the same thing happened towards the end of 2024. It just sort of hit me. I was like, connection and community is sort of the concept that I want to live into for 2025. And so I'm going to kind of set that as my goal. And, but it wasn't something like, I don't want you to think like, if you say choose a word, maybe choosing maybe you think about a concept that you want to live into for 2025, however you want to think about that. But this isn't something to like pressure you.
Yeah, there's a couple of examples I'd like to share that really where the word actually helped out quite a bit. So in 21, Keegan and I, this was, I was moving through recovery, and it was after discovery, and Keegan and I were working through a father-son devotional. So he was at the tail end of his junior year, going into senior year. And so one of the pages, or one of the assignments, was for us to pick a word. And so my word was renewal, because I really wanted to be, and it was driven by the scripture, and I'm not going to remember which one it is, but the renewal of your mind. And so I really wanted to renew that, and it was very important for me. And I have it on a little placard that I had, right next to my kitchen sink, and it was renewal, and it was very important for me to think through that. And Keegan's was stretch, and so he was going into his senior year, and he really wanted to kind of step out of his comfort zone and do different things. And so that was just something that stayed with him. So those are two good examples of words that we put out there. Now, does it mean that every activity was a renewal activity and every activity was a stretch activity? Well, no, of course not. But it was just something that kind of provided a little bit of a North Star for us, as for him and I, as we kind of moved through that year. The other one was at work. I started this plant, and we were emotional, and we wouldn't meet our goals, and all of these different things. And I noticed how people were speaking to each other was not very kind, and people were, all these different things. So I actually came up with the word that we're going to become a professional organization. I didn't define it, but I started to kind of step into it, and it allowed me to develop ways to garner feedback. It allowed me to develop ways to drive performance. It allowed me to coach people really well on how they should behave and how they should react to things, and how we should react to organizational difficulties that inevitably come. So, what's interesting now, just from the professionalism standpoint, is people view the plants that I'm a part of as being very professional. They're very calm, they're very focused, and they just go about the business of getting things done. Right. So it's interesting. And I don't think we would have gotten there. And there's a lot of activities that went about it without kind of picking that word and then having to define it.
Well, and I think that if people are like, how does this work, that you just pick a word and then things happen? It's like when you buy a new car, and it's a sparkly blue Toyota Corolla, and you've never seen that particular model or that particular color on the road before. And you're like, oh, this is so cool. And then you start driving it, and all of a sudden you see all these other same model, same color cars on the road. When you bring something into your consciousness, it sets a filter of awareness for you. So when you set a goal, like this word, I want to step into this word, I want to step into this value, your brain goes, oh, that's important to you. And it starts looking for ways to accomplish that, or to think around that topic. So that's why this, like you had mentioned, the subconscious never goes away. We don't want it to. It's very important. But what we're doing here is we're connecting the two. We're bringing things from our subconscious into our conscious mind, so that our filter and our awareness starts to pull information that helps us move towards these things. And that's what that's doing in a literal way. So the second thing we're going to suggest is maybe doing a little bit deeper than a word, making a values list. So that same word that we just came up with could be on your values list, like maybe connection or community, whichever one I would choose. Maybe that would be like number 1 for 2025, right? But determining your values, the thing about values is, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to, on a very deep level, you have a value system. There are things that are very, very important to you. I might have somebody come into a call, and, a trade partner, go, honesty is like the utmost value to me. That is like priority number 1. And when I look for a relationship, or when I'm engaging in a relationship, honesty is like the number 1 thing I look for, right? That's a value. That's a deep value that you hold. So we can actually go through a little bit of a process to determine what are our core values, and then organize them in a way that helps us when we're feeling a little stuck, or when we're making a decision, or we're trying to move forward, and maybe we have something new that we're trying in our life and we feel a little odd about it. We can look at our values list. So I'll attach a values list in the show notes just to kind of get you started. But if you want to do this at home, You can either look at the list or just think through the things that are the most important to you and just write them down. Just like do a brain dump of like a page of kind of writing these things down. Like, this is important to me. This is important to me. This means a lot to me. This is, honesty, vulnerability, empathy, integrity. Like, those are values, right? So when you have a long list, then I want you to look at it as the next step, and I want you to just sort of shorten it up. Is there anything that sort of goes together? Honesty, integrity, for example. Would honesty go into the word integrity? Okay, then just keep integrity if that makes sense to you. So you're going to shorten it up. You're just going to see if anything blends into each other. And then what I want you to do when you have a list of about 10 words that are really important to you, I want you to just organize it in terms of order of importance. So the top 3 are your top most important values that you maybe look for in other people, but particularly you want to live into. This is the person that you want to be. You want to be somebody that lives in integrity, connects well with other people, and shows up with empathy, just as an example, as the top 3, right? And you'll sort of know if it really aligns with you when you look at the bottom 3 and you're like, yeah, those are really nice. But then you look at the top 3 and you're like, that would make me feel super aligned, super good about myself. So the second thing is determine your values. I want you to make that list. And the way this is going to help you, as we talked about earlier, is kind of having that vision, right? Of like, these are the things that are very, very important in my life that I want to live into. So then when we're having conflict, when we're having difficult conversations with people, when we are trying to determine what our next steps are, or trying something new in our life, and we feel this internal discomfort, when you have a list of values, you can always line up what you're doing and what you're thinking with those values. So if you say, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now about this conversation I'm having with a friend of mine, and it's really hard for me. Then you go, okay, well, my first value on the list was integrity. Am I living into that with this conversation and with this process? And if you say yes, then you know that that discomfort is actually moving you towards your vision, towards your goal of who you want to be. And that type of discomfort is okay, because any change is uncomfortable. And when we're moving through these things, they will be uncomfortable. But then if it's moving you toward your vision, it's a good uncomfortable, because it's a growth discomfort, and growth discomfort is okay. But if you're having this conversation with your friend and then you look at your values list and you're like, you know what, I'm not actually stepping into integrity in this conversation, then it just sort of brings it into light of, you're going, okay, the reason I feel so uncomfortable is this is not helping me move towards my goal. It's actually going against my value system. Maybe I can change course.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about integrity, one of the most in the very specific learning piece for the addict is how to live into integrity. And I think sometimes what early on, what that means to them is to not lie about acting out, but everything else is still on the table. But really, it's about everything. So if an addict can say, I'm going to live into integrity and always communicate how I feel, always tell the truth in all things, you know what I mean? People will kind of go with the integrity piece. Well, there's little white lies that you can tell, like, oh no, like, they're all, because I've seen it. I've seen addicts who are in recovery from a behavioral standpoint get in trouble with their spouses because they tell some lies that are related to finances or whatever, you know what I mean? And so I think that's a big one, because what does it mean to live into integrity? And I think for the addict, as they begin to continue to grow, that's really, really important, because then it starts to permeate their entire lives. And that's really when recovery accelerates and takes off. You know what I mean? It's yes, it's great you're not doing the behavior, you're not lying about the behavior, but being to the point where you can communicate how you're feeling, you can tell the truth if you in whatever that may be.
Yeah. So what you're saying is basically recovery, the difference between sobriety and recovery is, sobriety is maybe I'm honest about the behavior and I'm not doing the behavior. Recovery is when the patterns of honesty and integrity start to filter into every part of your life.
Yep.
And that's really important.
Right.
The third tip that we have is to write it down. So if you're choosing a word, if you're determining your values, if you are, organizing your goals, whatever it is that you're doing for creating your vision in 2025, just write it down. For me, writing lists kind of helps me organize my brain. I did a lot of this the past couple days of kind of figuring out, okay, for example, Patrick and I are we're trying to organize teaching a course for church leaders in the area to help them understand the problem of sex addiction, the existence of betrayal trauma, how to communicate around it, how to create support groups in their church, that sort of thing. And we're going to use materials from Sexual Integrity 101 from Pure Desire. But what we have to do is sort of create this structure and this process. And so what I was doing the other day is writing down, okay, if we want to do this, I have to, we have to invite people. We have to organize with the person who's helping us do this. We have to, just kind of writing down what it is in order to accomplish this that I need to get done now. What are the steps that I need to take, right? So writing it down, making lists, those are things that can really just help clarify things in our mind. And when we're talking about creating the values and the vision for 2025, you can certainly do the end goal, but I would encourage you to kind of break it down from there.
Yeah.
Right. So what does that look like?
Yeah. They say that you're 70% more likely to accomplish something or to lean into something when you write it down. So think about that, 70%, you know what I mean? And so people do that all the time. They're like, well, my word is this. And then, they get 3 months into the year and their parents have been sick and their car's broken down. They can't remember their word anymore. You know what I mean? So it's nice to have, like my word of renewal was put on a placard right next to the bathroom sink. So I saw it every single day when I was in there.
Well, and the visual is important too, because again, talking about the conscious and the subconscious, even if you don't consciously think about that word every time you're in the bathroom, your subconscious is seeing it and it's sort of getting reiterated. That's my goal. That's my goal. That's
right.
Top of mind. That's top of mind. And again, what that does is it sets the filter of awareness so that then your mind is pulling information and looking for ways to accomplish that. And
right.
all of that sort of runs under the surface, which is kind of why that's so important to have those things in place.
To expand upon the story I told about professionalism, one of the things that we did in the creation of professionalism, it was just an idea that came out, was we took about 7 plant employees and we had them articulate our core values. And so it was like voice of the customer, it was be on time, it was all of these different things. And so we created these posters that was employee led, and the posters, to your point about the subconscious seeing it, the posters exist. I was actually looking at one yesterday. I was like, oh, because some of the folks aren't there anymore and stuff like that. But those posters are up in every break room and every conference room. And so we don't talk about them. We don't, kind of every day, kind of talk about it. But every employee is seeing that if they go in to get a coffee or those types of things.
Number 4 is break your life into categories and think through what you would like to accomplish, change, grow in. So we actually did that recently. And your version of this can be totally different, but we sort of broke it into 4 different categories. And one of them is we have rental property. So one of them is rentals. Like, what do we want to do in 2025? Our relationship, how do we want to improve that? What specific areas do we want to continue to grow in or build on? Work and ministry. So running this or starting this educational course, like we talked about, that's one thing that we're going to have to sort of think about. Patrick is starting an online group. So you just sort of thinking through what are our goals around some of these shifting things, how we are working, how we are putting us content out there in our schedules and that sort of thing. And then home. So what is it that, we wanted to focus on at home or in the home? So for some people, it might be home, family, spirituality, mental health, physical health, right? You can break it down however you want, but sometimes that's really helpful to just break your life down into the main categories and then think about, where am I at right now in terms of if you want to do a scale 1 to 10 or, just assess, maybe in my physical health, maybe that's really low. 2024, we didn't focus as much on that. And so, okay, 2025, I want to bump that up. Okay, if that's the fact that if that's the big goal for you, then underneath that, writing down, okay, what does that look like?
Yeah, I was actually, I wrote down some here just to help, and you've already hit on them. But spiritual goals, personal, professional, relational, financial. Those are all areas that you may be working on, and you may have set goals out there and stuff like that. And I think Kylene always likes it when you and I are on the same page. You'll use that term, and you always feel a little off if you feel like we're not on the same page. And so, we did sit down. I'm not sure what day of the week it was, but we did sit down and kind of go through and talk through some of our kind of what we want to accomplish. And relationally was a big one in there. And, it's for those of you going through relationship repair, it's not easy. And sometimes one person thinks things are going well and one person doesn't. And so it is important to sit down from a relationship standpoint and go, hey, what would make you feel more connected? What would make you feel more? And it's okay to write that stuff down and put it out there and gain agreement between the two of you.
I think even just having the conversation, right? It opened up a lot of things for us to kind of talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
So opening that door is really important. Okay, and so the fifth thing is, this is sort of the big one. I think it would sort of summarize everything, is choose a new identity. And we talk about this a lot in terms of the past 2 seasons of the podcast, and when it comes to recovery versus sobriety, when it comes to betrayal trauma recovery, when it comes to being the human that you want to be. One of the things that I think is the most empowering thing is that you get to choose who you are. You get to choose your identity. And I think that's something that's just not talked about a lot. And as I mentioned towards the beginning of this podcast, it's very easy as human beings to get overwhelmed with life or to get stuck in patterns and go, well, that's just my cross to bear. Well, that's just the thorn in my side. Well, that's just who I am. Well, just this is. Yes, we can all have predispositions. We can all have life patterns that are difficult. We can all have traumas that impact us in various ways. And we don't have to stay stuck. We get to choose who we want to be. We get to choose what we work on and how we grow. And we don't ever have to stay in the same spot. So while it's true that maybe someone has a difficult, family of origin and several traumatic events, and because of that has really short temper, and they tend to have outbursts if they get triggered, and they really attack people personally. Okay, we can understand where that comes from, and we can have compassion on that, but it doesn't excuse the behavior or the patterning, and it certainly doesn't mean that's who that person is, or that's the pattern that they have to live into. The same thing as addiction, right? Like when we start to understand the trauma aspect of addiction, the chemical patterns, the way the brain works, where it comes from, what they're living into, the wounds that they're medicating by engaging in this behavior, we can have compassion and empathy on that. But it doesn't say, oh, well, you're just an addict who has to stay an addict and that's who you are. So, but the thing is, like, it's easier for us to see that in certain areas, like addiction, for example, and go, well, of course I don't want to take that on as my identity. But we have to make sure that we're applying that concept to all of our life. Like, we don't have to stay who we are today, ever. And this is why this is so important, is that we have to, again, bringing the subconscious into the conscious, we need to choose very consciously who it is that we want to be. We need to set that filter. What is it that I want to grow in? How do I want to become a better person? What type of person do I want to be? And the second piece that's really going to sort of lock that in is, once you've decided who you want to be, take the time to determine what exactly it is that is getting in your way from accomplishing that. Yeah. So, like, what are the limiting beliefs? What are the thoughts? What are the fears? What are the insecurities? What are the patterns that show up in your life that are keeping you from accomplishing that goal, or being that person, or choosing or believing that identity about yourself? And I think the most obvious is addiction, right? Like, I think some people can get stuck in the concept of, well, I'm an addict, I'll always be an addict. This is something I'll always struggle with. And this is something we talked about a lot. You don't have to stay there. And I think that identity belief will keep you stuck. But if you really believe, well, I'm somebody that can accomplish total freedom, and I'm going to engage in the resources that help me accomplish that, and I'm going to surround myself with people that really believe in freedom, and then I'm going to practice the tools and the resources that these people and that these things tell me will help me get there. But I'm going to tell myself that I get to be the person that is in recovery, that doesn't struggle with addiction anymore. Mm-hmm. That mindset alone is, along with the action that you take, is like 50% of it. It's huge because if you, going back to what I was saying in the beginning, if you hold a belief in your subconscious, you'll live into that every time. So if you truly believe that you can't accomplish something, you won't accomplish it. So we want to make sure that you're choosing an identity that says I can, not I can't, and that I will, not that, maybe this is possible for me.
I've talked a little bit about the plant. One of the things I had to do was I had to say, I'm going to be a professional, capable plant manager, right? And so that means different things. But if you tie it back into, you had asked, we all went out to dinner on New Year's Eve, and you had asked the question, what did we learn in 2024? And this was like a big epiphany that came to me about midway through the year was, I'm a guy that goes through life and I just make good decisions. And so that took me 3.5 years to get to that point. So there was some shame involved. There was some identity, issues involved there. But, what'll end up happening is if you think via shame or whatever, that you're a bad husband or a bad guy or whatever, because of what you've done, you're going to live into that. And so you can't erase what you've done, but if you kind of say, hey, I'm a good guy, what do good guys do? What do good husbands do? Good guys and good husbands, they work on themselves. If they came out of addiction, they're open and honest. They show up for their family. If the spouse says, hey, I got a little bit triggered by your behavior, let's talk about it. A good guy or a good husband, they will actually be fine talking through those things. Or if they're not, they may identify that feeling like, hey, why is that bothering me? Right. And so it's always kind of forward looking versus bad guy, bad husband is backward looking. So that's a big part of that. And so, it's you can say, what's the statement? Once a cheater, always a cheater. Well, not necessarily, right? If you believe that you are just going to cheat, then maybe you will cheat. But if you're like, no, that was something I did in the past, I am now a man of integrity and I'm faithful to my wife. And then you live into that.
And primarily because you combine that with the actionable items that help you step into that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's not just, we always need to we always want to combine words and actions, because you will have people out there that go, oh no, I am, totally great. And they've never done any work.
Right.
So we just want to caveat that.
Oh,
the deep belief is it has a combination of things.
Yeah.
It is the true belief that you can change, but it's demonstrating that through time and behavior and actions that prove that belief out. But you want to start with the belief that it's possible. And that's what we're kind of talking about. If you don't believe something's possible, you won't accomplish it.
Well, and I was thinking about that. So like if you say, hey, I'm not somebody who does inappropriate things, and you get in a weird situation because you're still early in recovery and you relapse, right? Somebody who says, well, I'm a person that's not going to do those things, and they take the time and they look at that relapse and they go, okay, this was an open portal here and I need to close this off. And I also made a commitment that I was going to call one of the guys in my group, and I didn't do that. So now how do I make sure that moving forward, that's what a man who's living into, hey, I'm going to be a good guy does. It doesn't. It's the analysis.
Integrity is the priority. They're identifying, where did that not align with that value?
Right.
And how do I resolve that issue so that I can step into integrity completely?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the last little bit around this one, choosing your identity, is sometimes for some people, it's going to be really easy actually to identify the limiting belief, because maybe you just believe it so well and you speak, we all sort of have tendencies to speak really negatively about ourselves. So some people can immediately go, oh yeah, I don't feel like I'm worthy of love if I don't, like an example. So I actually had to tell my mom one time, I was like, Mom, you do realize, because my mom's very nice. She comes over, she's like, let me help you do this. Let me help you clean up after dinner. Let me do that. Da, 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 da. I was like, Mom, you do realize like, you don't have to earn my love, right? Like, you don't have to do all these things for me to love you. And she's like, well, I like doing it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it doesn't, you don't have to for me to like you, Right. So sometimes we can have this internal belief of like, well, if I don't do X, Y, Z, then I'm not lovable. Right. And so that might be really easy for some of you to identify and go, yeah, I really resonate with that. And I don't think that I'm worthy of love, or I don't think that people will like me if I don't do X, Y, Z, if I don't show up as the people pleaser, or or maybe saying it a different way, if I speak my mind, people won't like me. If I use my voice, people won't accept who I am. Whatever it is, if I disagree, that means people will be mad at me, right? Those are all sorts of limiting beliefs. And so that might be fairly easy for some of you to identify, but some of you might resonate a little bit more with identifying who you want to be, right? The replacement belief. And either way is fine, as long as you then take the time to identify the opposite. So if you are like, I totally know who I want to be. I want to be someone that says, I am worthy and valuable exactly as I am. That's my goal. Great. What is getting in the way of you believing that to your core today? And you go, okay, well, because I have these life experiences and because of betrayal, I actually have a really, really deep wound that says, I'm unlovable and I'll never be good enough. Okay, that is helpful. But if we don't know what's standing in the way from us really accepting the identity that we want, then we will keep living into the actual belief that's deep in the subconscious. I hope I'm explaining this enough. So like we can consciously be very aware of what we want, but if we don't do the work to identify the subconscious emotional level belief that's getting in the way, then we will keep living into the negative every single time. Thing that's getting in our way every single time. So we just have to take the time to make sure we're identifying both. And then if you want to go beyond that, I would bring that to your coach, your therapist, your practitioner, and say, hey, I want to work on this. I've identified that like this is the pattern that's getting in my way. I really have a deep-seated belief that I'm not valuable because of XYZ, or like people will always abandon me if I don't, make sure that everything is perfect for them in their life, right? There's so many different reasons. This is in no way saying anything negative about anyone. We all have these based on different life experiences. We all have these fears. We all have these insecurities. We all have these doubts. But it's in identifying them that allows us to then begin to work on them and overcome them so that we can consciously choose the new identity, process the pain in the subconscious, and then eliminate it. So, or I don't know if you say completely eliminate it, but process it to the point where it doesn't rule your life so that you actually can step into the goal that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something about rule your life. You a lot of times addicts, that's exactly what an addict does. An addict allows their negative self-beliefs to drive their compulsive behavior. And so, you can minimize, you can understand, you can do all those things, and they may still be there. Mine still show up on occasion, but it doesn't drive compulsive behavior for me anymore. And so that's an example of where you have to keep understanding what it is, and that like I've had to kind of with you, I've had to kind of go, no, I am lovable. She does love me. She's demonstrating this every day. You know what I mean? She doesn't want to be with somebody else, because of what I've done to her. Like I've had to really, work through that. And that's an identity piece. Like, I'm actually, so anyway.
Yeah. You had a limiting belief, lack of worthiness.
Right.
Yeah. And then your behavior was like, yeah, see, I just proved that to myself. And that's an example of self-sabotage. Addicts may have deeply rooted beliefs about their worth or their value that are really negative. And part of the behavior is self-sabotage. I'm going to prove to myself that I'm really not worthy and that she will eventually leave me. And that was a little bit of your patterning. And part of recovery is removing the shame and going, I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person who did a bad thing, but now I'm a good person who's doing good things.
Right.
And that's in the past. And I'm doing the work to, make amends and to be honest and to have integrity. And I don't have to keep beating myself up about what happened. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is, just a couple ways that I hope is helpful for you. I really think the subconscious piece is the deepest part of, and choosing the identity is really the deepest part of long-term healing. And so we definitely didn't just want to talk about, fluffy resolutions or like, hey, let's make a mission statement or values goal for 2025. Those are all really, really good. But if we're not getting to the root of why accomplishing that is hard, or what is standing in your way, or what is the pattern of the belief that is coming up for you when you say that, then we won't be as successful. So we definitely wanted to kind of talk about that underlying root cause stuff with you today. So 5 things that you can do to choose who you want to be so you don't have to stay stuck and to align to your values and your vision in 2025. You can choose a word that really aligns with you. You can determine your values. You can write whatever it is that you're processing down. You can break your life into categories and think through what it is that you would like to improve on or focus on. And you can choose an identity and take the time to identify if there's anything getting in the way of you accomplishing that or believing it on a deep soul level.
Oh, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of resources out there too for like developing, like if you don't fully understand exactly, or you come away from this podcast going, wait a minute, like what exactly? There's just some really good things there. I think Andy Stanley wrote a great book called Visioneering that's out there that really can help with these types of things.
And if you are a betrayed partner who needs support in your healing journey and your recovery journey, maybe you've gone through the full therapeutic disclosure, but you're still really struggling with anger or grief or sadness or some of these things, and you're just like, okay, this all sounds great, but I have difficulty kind of identifying in my own life how to do this, or I'm really struggling with these emotions and I just can't seem to move past them or move forward, and I just feel stuck, then definitely reach out. There's a link in the show notes. I would love to support you. I do have some space for some one-on-one clients in 2025. So if that is you, you can book a free connection call and we can see if working together is right. And a lot of the impactful work that I do with my clients, beyond just sort of helping you think through things or reframing things, is doing some of the deeper subconscious emotional processing exercises. And that's really where we see a lot of the transformation. So if that's resonating with you, click the link in the show notes and I would be happy to see if working together is a good fit. And we hope you have a great start to your 2025, and we will see you next week.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.